Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I mean, it's just already you being here has just ministered to me so much. Just knowing that there's all kinds of people out there who have, the same kind of calling, the same passion, and who understand just the journeys that people have gone through to get here to Canada, and to know that you're all mobilizing to be Jesus's hands and feet to welcome these people is just absolutely amazing. So I thank you for all of your work. I thank you for the ministry that you do, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means way more to the people that you're actually ministering to. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and just bear with me just a moment here. Let me make this look a little bit better here. Um, so just like Isaiah prayed, today it's sort of like, I mean, we have about 20 minutes for me to share. If you know me, and only a few of you kind of know me, I could talk for days about this topic, really and honestly and truly, and I have actually. Um, but um, but so please know that today is just sort of just like like a primer, just like a beginning sort of look to just look at some hopefully some good tips and some ideas. And like Isaiah was saying, with the focus on what does it mean to be someone who's befriending and who's welcoming a refugee who's experienced trauma, right? What are some of the things to be thinking about? What are the things to be noticing? Noha shared that story earlier that was so profound and so typical of the people we work with. Um, and so I hope that tonight you come away with a better understanding of those kinds of pieces and then what to do, or at least general ideas on how to approach people. Um, so yeah, so thank you for having me, and let's go ahead and begin. So I'm sure you don't need me to spend too much time on just pointing out the various challenges that newcomers and refugees face here in Canada. This list is not exhaustive either by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, we have people in our communities who've experienced terrible things in their home countries, right? They've experienced maybe war, political violence, just all kinds of oppression, all kinds of things, perhaps natural disasters for some, and so they carry these memories with them as they as they as they're here in Canada. In fact, today, as was mentioned, I'm a trauma therapist, so I met with people today, and I was talking to a guy from Ukraine, and he was just saying how everybody in his peer group, they're all gone one way or the other in terms of living in the city where he came from. Whether it be they've moved away, whether it be they're serving in the military, or whether it be that they've passed away. And he himself, and I'm not going to go into any detail or anything, but he himself has had tremendous losses to his family. So you can just imagine people are living beside us, going to our churches or in the homes that are working with that you're working in, who've had these terrible experiences. Of course, coming to Canada might bring a change of status and income and other changes that people might experience as they come here, right? Even just adapting to the culture. People who are professionally trained who are now trying to just make ends meet somehow. There's all kinds of other changes that might occur, as you can imagine. There's also difficulties with settlement, right? Which is, you might be surprised to hear that for a lot of people I work with, this is actually one of the biggest concerns, really, right? Just getting established in Canada, feeling like, okay, I'm on top of what I need to be on top of to live a really good life here, right? And the impact that that has on mental health is profound to the point where, like, if I have someone who's struggling with housing and they get that housing resolved, I see their symptoms improve so much. But the instability of not really being sure where they're going to live, or even, for some, like whether they're going to be approved in Canada, how their hearing's going to go, those kinds of pieces can actually trigger up memories and symptoms of the trauma, right? The trauma that they're trying to escape from. So I'm sure those of you who've done this work for a while, you've seen that. You've seen once people get kind of in a stable setting, that a lot of times their mental health kind of improves just dramatically as they're able to get that established. Of course, there's loneliness and isolation for some if there's not really a community for them to be a part of, or really a community of people who understand, right? That can be a challenge as well. So of course, all of these things can lead to issues with mental health and trauma. And so the focus of tonight is, of course, looking at trauma and what is trauma. Well, I have a couple of definitions here. These aren't actual definitions from, like, they call it the DSM-5. That's like the diagnostic manual that kind of lays out the symptoms in more detail. But I think these are nicely articulated because they're all encompassing and they capture the experiences a lot of people are having. So the first one is trauma occurs when someone has experienced or witnessed events so extreme, severe, powerful, harmful, or threatening that they require extraordinary coping efforts. And again, when you think about that, these events could just be as simple as, yeah, I came to a new country and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to stay here, right? Let alone all of the stuff that they would have experienced in their home country. And another example of a definition could also be the one in green. Trauma can be seen as a state of physical or emotional shock, which may be a result of real, anticipated, imagined, or forgotten experiences or encounters. Trauma may occur at an individual, a group, or a cultural level. 20 minutes, eh? That's how much I'm speaking here today. I could easily spend like again 8 hours probably just talking about that one definition. I'm not even exaggerating. There's just a lot there that I kind of want to just point out just really quickly. So trauma can be a result of real experiences people have had, right? Real, and a lot of times the experiences that seem so unlikely to those of us living in Canada, or the news hasn't really explain the scope, or it can't really ever explain the scope of what people have been through. That was my experience of hearing my client today from Ukraine, right? Like I've been to Ukraine, you know, I have an idea of what's happening there, but then when he explained to me the situation in his city, I was like, wow, it's mind blowing, right? So there's those real experiences, but then there's also those that are like anticipated or imagined to a certain extent, right? So in other words, a person's perspective on what happened to them really matters, right? And so one thing that we don't do in trauma therapy is that we don't really challenge someone's, well, we do challenge the interpretation eventually, but like we don't question it, right? Like if someone says this experience for me was horrifying, and maybe we heard about it and we think that doesn't sound too bad, we don't say that to them, right? We take it as seriously as it impacts them. So that's really interesting. And then you also have the piece around the individual, the group, and the cultural level too, right? And unfortunately for the refugees that we're working with, a lot of them are not suffering these pieces in isolation, right? There's people in their communities or maybe adjacent communities that are also have experienced something similar, or it's really complicated, right? It's felt on a group level. And this is really important, especially when we consider that many of the cultures that people are coming from are quite communal, right? And one of the things that I've noticed in some of the countries that I've had a chance to work with and some of the people that I've had to work with here in Canada is that healing can also take place on a communal level too, one way or another. And I think the church is just so beautifully poised to be able to minister in those areas. Okay, so let's move on here. So in terms of how does trauma impact us, this is a really helpful list of symptoms that I have. By the way, I kind of made these slides, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, and I did that on purpose, but I made them to be shared. So Alice, if that's okay, I'll share them with you, and you can disperse them to everybody. Yeah, not a problem. Thank you. So yeah, and the story that Noha shared was just so like there's a bunch of these symptoms. I was thinking of this chart when she was talking, right? And it's so typical of many of the people that we work with and that we are journeying beside, that they will have experiencing these symptoms um that are just hallmarks of trauma. I mean, for me, this is like every day the work that I do, the people that I'm working with, this is their reality. And it's not to problematize them or to suggest that they're sick or that there's something terribly wrong with them, because that's not even the message. The message is that people's bodies are trying to adapt to what they've been through, and in a kind of an interesting way, their bodies are actually trying to help them to protect themselves. And so therefore, a lot of these symptoms are coming up. Um, so anyways, rather than explain why, I just thought it would be important just to point out the symptoms for you and go through just a few of them just to give you an idea of what they are. A lot of them are quite self-explanatory. For instance, like nightmares, this would be a symptom, of course, many people experience. It could be about the trauma itself, or it could be about just like a theme that's related to the trauma, right? So maybe what they're actually dreaming didn't actually happen to them, right? I have a client right now who's having nightmares about going back to her home country and facing actually her abusive husband, which is why she fled. And what that would be like, those are what her dreams are like, even though that hasn't happened. But it's certainly related to the theme of why she's here, right? And then of course you have other people who actually have like recurrent nightmares of what actually happened. A flashback is kind of like almost like a nightmare, but you're awake, right? In a way. It's like you're re-experiencing the event. And it could be so profound and so powerful that the person isn't even sure that that they're here in Canada in 2025, right? Which is when this is being recorded, right? It might really feel to them like, wow, like it feels like I'm back home or back in my home country, you know, 5 years ago or 2 years ago or 2 months ago when the trauma was happening, right? Now, for that, I mean, those are the most extreme cases. For some people, it's just a feeling. Like it's just like, oh, it feels like it's happening again. Oh, but they know that they're here too, right? And so people will experience those on a few different levels as well. Of course, intrusive memories are memories that kind of pop in at the worst possible times. They can be in English class, they can be at work, they can be at school, and the terrible memories pop in. And it's not like even anybody's reminded them of anything, right? So that can happen to people a lot of times. They can even be in church and the memories will pop in, right? And as Noha was kind of suggesting, how we respond, right, can be really helpful in that moment to know what to do. Startle response, I'm only going to pick out the ones that maybe seem a little bit elusive, right? Or maybe you're not too familiar with, because some of these are pretty obvious, but startle response, that's just when someone's really jumpy, right? It's kind of like maybe they'll hear a loud sound and it causes them to jump. Or if someone comes up behind them, they get startled easily, right? And again, that's just a person's nervous system that has become so adaptive to like responding to emergency that they're still on guard and they're not really sure how to respond to that and how to slow that down again. Okay. One thing you'll notice, and this is actually interesting with a lot of cultures, people will talk about chronic pain, maybe like headaches or stomach aches or things like that, more than they talk about any of these other symptoms. I have a number of clients, it's almost like, oops, sorry. It's almost like I'm a doctor, right? And we're talking about their medical symptoms because that's kind of the language of trauma that they have from their culture, and that's what they're noticing. But it is directly related to trauma, and yeah, it might seem kind of like hard to know how to minister to that, but certainly being an open ear and a normalizing ear is helpful. I really need to move on. I wanted to discuss a couple more, and then the rest I think are relatively self-explanatory. Hypervigilance, that's just when someone is really, really hyper alert to their surroundings, and like always scanning for safety. They feel like they're always unsafe, right? They feel like there's always a problem and that they have to respond to. Again, it's very adaptive response that they've had because they've come from, and maybe they're still in a situation now where they kind of have to be like that, right? Like I work with refugee claimants as well, and I know a lot of them are quite hypervigilant because they're like, if I make one little mistake, does this mean I'm going to get booted out of Canada, right? So they're very hypervigilant to things like that. And dissociation in some ways feels like a little bit the opposite. That's not being connected to yourself or to your surroundings, right? It feels like you're kind of like spaced out, right? People who've endured like a long-term ongoing trauma, like maybe people who've been in a war zone for a long time, they might have these symptoms because it's kind of like their brain's way of shutting them away from the pain of what's happening, right? And so they carry that symptom with them when they come to Canada. All right. So much to talk about, but what are I figured we should move on now. So what are some of the attitudes? I know a lot of you are, or maybe all of you are journeying with newcomers in various ways. And of course, in the time that we have, we can't get hyper technical. And Isaiah, like I love how he said, like we're not doctors here. We're people who are just trying to serve and just trying to love people. So what are the basic attitudes we need in order to be able to do this as Christians and just as people who are concerned? Well, first, this idea of agape Christian love, right? Everything that you know about that is so important. I'm telling you this, maybe it's just like a really obvious point, but I'm telling you this as a trauma therapist, as someone who works with people in a very technical level about their traumas. When they have someone in their lives, whether they're a family member or like a good friend in your case, or just even some kind of support system that is just really interested in their lives, really loving them, really valuing who they are as people, it just makes a massive difference. I'm constantly asking people because the research shows that people who are experiencing mental health as well as trauma, like they really need a strong support system around them in order to be able to heal from these pieces, right? And so by you just showing that love, you're doing things that like all the trauma therapists we're like cheering for you all because you're the ones that are actually really doing the work. We're just saying, hey, maybe you should connect to Allison, maybe you should connect to Noha or Cheryl or Danielle, right? Like and talk to them and work with them because they love you and they care for you. So that's a huge attitude um, to have. And it kind of probably the rest of the points kind of fall under that love point. I probably should have designed the slide to make it look like that, truthfully. Next is a listening heart. I mean, my client today, I mean, okay, so I've been to Ukraine, I'm a trauma therapist, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't really know what to say, right? When he was basically saying, yeah, like all of my friends are gone, my city, the life that I once had is totally vanished, right? And I didn't really have an answer for that, right? Because what he was saying was absolutely true. He's a very thoughtful man, very intelligent man, and he could see like there wasn't any simple answer to any of this, right? But he still thanked me because I just listened, right? And that is a huge piece. A lot of refugees, newcomers, refugee claimants don't really feel listened to, right? I mean, they're even having to report their stories over and over again to various services and medical things and all kinds of things, and it's really, really difficult. So to have someone in their life who actually listens to them closely, pays attention to what they're saying, right? Even if you don't have the answers, you're doing an amazing thing. It's a beautiful thing that you're offering to them. So I would encourage you to listen to their stories, right? And listen to what's going on in their lives. Um, yeah, I don't really know how else to say it. I can't stress it enough how important it is. Empathy. So this would be, not that really any of us, I mean, I'm an immigrant myself, but I came under different circumstances probably compared to all the people we're working with. So there's pieces that I get and I can kind of have empathy for, right? But there's all kinds of things that I'm not going to fully get, right? Of course, I've never lived in a war zone, for instance. So, but what I can do is I can at least let them know that, hey, I'm listening, I'm hearing you, and I get that this is a really, really difficult thing that you've been through, right? Or, wow, even today to my client, I said, I imagine it's so hard for you to be in Canada, knowing that everybody else, right, has kind of endured, like in his peer group, I mean, has endured what's happened and they've met with different consequences as a result, but he's here safe in Canada. So that was kind of just a little brief example of showing empathy, what that might look like, even though I've never been in that situation myself, right? So it's really, and I kind of added this point a little bit later on, it really is about taking their concerns seriously, believing them, and responding to them. Again, I probably should have put that right underneath the empathy piece, because that's another way of explaining what empathy looks like. And actually, this other point also summarizes it well too. Um, Actually, no, it doesn't. I was thinking of another word. I was going to say validating what they're telling us is super important as well. We can also value their contributions in their friendships and lives, right? I mean, these are people with amazing skills, talents, abilities, and ways to contribute to our churches, ways to contribute to us in our lives, right? They can be like our best friends too, and people that we actually look up to and learn as well, right? They're normal people, and they can be wonderful. And if you're interested, I have there, you can look up trauma-informed ministry. The above attitudes are kind of just the basis for this, but there's all kinds of things that churches can really intentionally think about in order to minister more in terms of understanding trauma. These attitudes are just kind of like the foundational principles behind a lot of that. All right, just gonna just got some noise outside that I don't know if you can hear, so I just wanted to just address that quickly. So how can churches minister to refugees? Well, like I said, we can befriend them, we can walk alongside them and include them in our communities, right? Have them be an integral part of the church, have them serve in the church one way or the other. If this is appropriate to, the very settings that you're working in right now, right? It's not just like they are there just to receive our loves. I think Isaiah kind of said something like, like we're not the saviors of them and they're not like our projects kind of thing, right? These are people that we're supporting, but they're people and they can also, again, contribute to our communities and be like equal parts of our communities in a lot of different ways, right? So we can think about that. Earlier, I mentioned, if people's like, uh, if their needs are met, a lot of times it really helps their mental health. And so this is something that churches can do, help with material needs, help them to maybe find housing, help them to connect to resources. And I know that it's super complicated and there's a lot to be thinking about helping people to settle. But even if you just help a little bit, helping people to get winter clothing if they're arriving in November or October, right? Something as simple as that can go a long way in helping people to address their needs, especially if they don't understand how cold Owen Sound gets, right, in the winter, right? Um, and ministering healing, of course. And I had some suggestions here. that will be on the slides that are in a way written in a way that you'll be able to just take yourself through them of looking at different ways that you can kind of work with people to help them to deal specifically with some of the symptoms. Again, this listening non-judgmentally is really important, praying with them, and maybe even connecting them to other resources. And so, in terms of dealing with trauma symptoms, and this might be where I kind of have to end that, just given our time. Um, I did want to mention a few little quick pieces here. So first of all, we can inquire, right? The story that Noha shared with us earlier, we can kind of sit down with this person and say, hey, like, are you feeling okay? Like, is everything okay? I've noticed that you're da 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 da. Like, what's happening there for you, right? So we can inquire about the symptoms and normalize them. I've done my best in our little bit of time here just to say that trauma symptoms are like a natural bodily response, reaction. You could even say it's part of God's given design in our bodies to protect ourselves. It's just an extension of that security protection system, really, right? And so we can normalize these symptoms. We can say, listen, you know what? It's totally understandable that you feel the way you do. That was really my message to my client today from Ukraine. I was like, I get where you're coming from. Like, it totally makes sense that you feel like this. I don't have any answers, but I can see how, hearing this news from what's been happening in your city, how distressing that is, right? Next, there's common coping strategies, and this is what I said the additional slides really address. There's like an appendix on the slideshow that you'll see when you go through it later on. But there's things like, of course, we can pray for people. We can encourage them from the word, right? That's all totally great and apt and really helpful. And I'm saying this as a trauma therapist. By the way, I work with people from across different faiths, right? All kinds of different people. And certainly prayer is something that I would definitely encourage you to do. And even encouraging them from the Bible too, when it feels respectful to do that. There's things like deep breathing. There's a breathing script that I have on one of the slides you can look at. You can encourage them to do some self-care, which is also another really important piece that a lot of migrants, for various reasons, don't feel like they can do. And then we can also help them to look at their thoughts and look at them differently as well. Remember that helping newcomers with practical needs really helps too. It goes a long way in improving their mental health. And then also, I would encourage you to get to know the services in your area to refer the person to. And on the slideshow, I think I misread an email. I put only services from Hamilton, right? These are just a few services that are around. And you probably know of more, truthfully. This is just like the bare basic quick Google search, right? Um, but again, these are some services, and it's really important to get to know them so then you can connect people when they have a need that your church really can't minister to, right? And it's okay to refer people. It's okay to refer people for mental health care or settlement services or health services. By health, I mean like physical health. Um, yeah, there's going to be pieces that we can't do, so it's important for us to be able to adjust that. All right. Well, I think now it's our time to maybe have some question and answer time. Um, I imagine after a presentation like this, you might have many questions. I'm not sure. Um, but I just thought we'd give some of the time, just like we said we would, to to address any questions that might have come through to Isaiah.